Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well and I hope you enjoyed the readings and the activities from last week and that hopefully I know a little bit more about everyone now that you've done your introduction and you know a little bit more about me. Um, I'm still in Philadelphia. We'll probably be here for the whole 12 weeks. And on we go. All right, so this week we're in week 2, and you're going to read a little bit more in the text here, and then do some additional reading. Reading's a little light this week, prepping you for some of the weeks with more reading coming up. Um, so we're going to begin to be introduced to the moral principles and how they may be in conflict in any situation, as um, the text explores different philosophical underpinnings and moral reasonings and shows you how, any issue, you can really come out on either side of it. So for a lot of, as I said last week, that bioethics is really, it's a practical, it's applied practice of ethics. And what's really often important is the decision making process and understanding the impact of any decision. And as a patient advocate, you really want to understand what is driving your client's decision making so you can understand them and not necessarily influence, but make sure they have all the information. So, as bioethics is an applied field, it's the goal is to solve bioethical challenges and problems. So, we're going to begin this week in learning about some of the tools to figure out how to do this. So, there are basic tools of the process. There's critical reasoning, logical argument, and conceptual analysis. And hopefully, we'll be using these over and over again in the assignments that you're given and with your ethical briefs. So that'll be fun. So these tools are obviously influenced by one's philosophical beliefs, and one's philosophical beliefs will impact the outcome. And this demonstrates there are no right answers. So again, that shows you how the decision-making process is important. Um, the text introduces some philosophical beliefs this week, and next week we'll delve into that a little deeper. So I'm not going to really talk about this much. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week and in some of the questions that are coming up. So I want to talk a little bit now about some of the core principles that I briefly introduced last week: autonomy, paternalism, beneficence, non-malfeasance, utility, and justice. And the text goes into them a little bit, and I want you to think about them while you're reading the article. Um, the article, um, Should I Help My Patients Die, and listening to the TED Talk, Ethical Riddles in HIV Research. But first now, I'm just sort of want to give a brief introduction to each of them to complement the text. So we have autonomy and paternalism, and often with these ethical core principles, they come together because you're balancing. It's a balancing act, right? So autonomy, the patient has the right to make their own decision. And in paternalism, you have the powers that be, whether it's the physician or the government, are the ones that make a decision, and that you have to balance these things out. And the balance changes depending on the age of the patient or the client. Um, and the young end and sometimes in the older end as people lose their mental capacity. So in the idea of informed consent comes from autonomy. People need to be able to make a decision, but they need to have all the information in front of them to be able to make the decision. So for instance, that's really why it's important for informed consent, all that information to be in plain English so people can understand, to be translated to different languages. Now I know there's a big movement with health literacy and video informed consent so people can really understand what they are consenting to. Um, I know I was teaching a class recently in ethical issues in bioethics, and one of the students pointed out that she had a family member that had just been rushed to the hospital, and they had all these papers to sign and everything to read. And she's like, "We consented to it, but we didn't really understand." But again, they didn't really have time. Like her relative needed to be operated on right away. So sometimes you have a little bit more time to delve into what's going on. So these are some of the practical issues as patient advocates that you're going to be helping your clients with that are going to be influenced by these core principles of autonomy and paternalism. Then we have beneficence and non-malfeasance, and they often, again, are a balancing act, right? Because to do no harm, non-malfeasance, and to do good. Well, sometimes, right, doctors prescribe medicine that has side effects, and how do you decide if those side effects are worth the good that the drug might do? Again, that comes back to autonomy and letting the patient making sure that the patient or the client really understands what all the side effects are, and that the side effects might lead to the need of more drugs. So it's all complicated and interrelated, and right, it all goes together. So then we have utility, which is also, again, the balance of good over bad. And again, I was in a class and I had a guest speaker, and the guest speaker, my friend Carol, is a professor of nursing, and she has been volunteering in a free clinic in Texas that serves mainly undocumented immigrants. So they have no access to health care. So not only are they poor and scraping by, they don't have access to health care like poor Americans, poor citizens, hopefully would have access to Medicaid. So there was a woman that came in and had a butterfly pattern on her face, and Carol knew immediately that this woman probably had lupus, and she said to one of the other healthcare providers there, well, we should, diagnose her and confirm the diagnosis. And one of the workers that worked there said, that's great, you're right, she probably does have lupus, but we don't have the medicine, we don't have access to the medicine to treat it. So what good is it to diagnose her and give her this information when we can't treat it? Now, again, someone might say, well, she should know she has lupus, so there might be things she can do. But what are you doing if you can't? What good is it to diagnose if you can't actually provide the treatment? And that's something that touches on a lot of things with healthcare, especially with public health and with screening. Is it worth screening people if you can't actually provide them the treatment? So that's where the idea of utility, it's an example of utility, more on a system-wide basis. And then justice is the last of the core principles we're going to discuss right now. And the main idea is getting what is fair or what is due. And again, this is a balancing act, and it's allocation of resources, like the example I just gave with utility, is we don't often have enough resources for everyone. I know when people are talking about different healthcare systems, they'll often talk about scarcity or rationing when they talk about socialized medicine. But in our country, obviously, we have some rationing, because if you have health insurance, or you have better health insurance, you have better access to health care than if you don't. I know, for instance, I have a high deductible for my health care, and it definitely impacts how I utilize my health care and whether I'm not going to go. So there is a lot of issues with justice and allocation of resources on many levels. So that's just a quick introduction. Again, those will be coming up with many examples of these core principles again and again. I mean, that's the focus of the whole class, and we'll see how they relate to other things in bioethics. And we talk about things like abortion or reproductive technology or end of life. They all come back to these core principles. So again, just finally, I want you to think about the decision process that you are observing and that you make on your own when you're thinking about some of these issues. So I hope you enjoy the supplemental readings and the TED Talk this week, and I look forward to your questions or your answers to the discussion question and the weekly question, and I will see you later. Again, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm always available. Thanks.